I never meant to break Vincent Marino's cardinal rule. Working as a maid in a mafia boss's mansion comes with an unspoken manual: eyes down, mouth shut, questions buried 6 feet under. For 3 years, I'd perfected the art of being invisible, just another shadow dusting expensive furniture, another ghost haunting marble hallways. It was safer that way. When you've already lost everything that mattered, invisibility feels like armor. But armor cracks. That Tuesday morning, while the autumn light sliced through the study's velvet curtains, my duster froze mid-air. There, perched on Vincent's mahogany desk between a crystal decanter and a loaded pistol, sat a gold-framed photograph. And the boy smiling back at me was Daniel. My Daniel. My son who I'd buried 3 winters ago with dirt under my fingernails and screams trapped in my throat. The duster slipped from my hands. The world tilted sideways like God had kicked the floor out from under me. My heart hammered so violently I thought my ribs might shatter from the inside out. But silence shattered the moment I walked into his study. I wasn't supposed to be there, not really. Vincent had left for a meeting, and I was finishing the second floor cleaning when I noticed his study door ajar, afternoon sunlight spilling through like an invitation. Just a quick dust, I told myself. In and out. Nobody would know. The photograph sat on his desk, angled slightly toward his chair, like he looked at it often. At first, my brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing. It was impossible. Medically, logically, universally impossible. But the scar above the left eyebrow didn't lie. Neither did the dimple when he smiled, or the way his eyes crinkled at the corners exactly like his father's used to. My son. My Daniel. Very much alive in this photograph, very much real, wearing clothes I'd never bought him, standing in a place I'd never taken him. No. The word fell from my lips like a stone into still water. No, no, no. What are you doing in here? Vincent's voice cracked through my spiral like thunder. I spun around, the frame clutched to my chest, tears already streaming down my face without permission. This boy. My voice broke on every syllable. This is Daniel. My son. I buried him 3 years ago. Vincent froze in the doorway, his expression cycling through confusion, anger, and then something that looked like the ground opening beneath his feet. He stared at me, then at the photo, then back at me. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. That's Matteo Marino. My son. The child I lost 8 years ago. He moved toward me slowly, like approaching a wild animal. I was told he was dead. But I never saw his body. The air in the study grew heavy, suffocating, charged with the weight of impossible coincidences and buried truths clawing their way to the surface. 2 grieving parents. 1 photograph. And a truth that would unravel everything. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, like the video and share with loved ones, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. The study felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were closing in to witness something they shouldn't. Vincent Marino stood in the doorway, a statue carved from disbelief and barely contained rage. His perfectly pressed suit seemed at odds with the chaos brewing behind his eyes. You're lying. His voice was flat, dangerous. The kind of voice that preceded violence. I shook my head, clutching the frame tighter against my chest. My hands were still trembling, tears still tracking down my cheeks like they'd forgotten how to stop. I'm not. I swear to God, I'm not lying. This is Daniel. My Daniel. That, Vincent said, taking a step into the room, is Matteo Marino. My son. And I don't know what kind of sick game you're playing, but... Game? The word exploded from me, sharp and bitter. You think this is a game? You think I want to be standing here, looking at a photograph of my dead son in a stranger's house, losing my mind? Vincent's jaw clenched. He's not dead. He was taken. He is dead. My voice cracked, splintering into pieces. I buried him. I stood over his grave and watched them lower the coffin into the ground. I felt the dirt under my fingernails from where I clawed at the earth because I couldn't accept it. Don't you dare tell me my son isn't dead. For a moment, something flickered across Vincent's face, something that looked almost like understanding. Almost like shared pain. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by cold suspicion. When? He demanded. What? When did he die? 3 years ago. The words tasted like ash. April 7th. A Tuesday. It was raining. Vincent went very still. Too still. The kind of stillness that meant gears were turning behind those calculating eyes, pieces clicking into place that shouldn't fit but somehow did. Matteo was taken 8 years ago, he said slowly, more to himself than to me. He was 7 years old. Blonde hair. Blue eyes. A scar. Above his left eyebrow, I finished, my voice barely a whisper. Shaped like a crescent moon. He got it when he was 4, fell off his bike trying to race the neighborhood kids. Vincent's face went pale. Actually pale, like I'd reached into his chest and squeezed his heart. I kept going, unable to stop now that the dam had broken. He had a dimple. Right here. I touched my left cheek. Only showed up when he really smiled, not the polite smile he used for strangers. The real one. And his eyes, they weren't just blue, they had these little gold flecks near the center, like someone had sprinkled stardust there. Stop. Vincent's voice came out strangled. He hated tomatoes but loved ketchup, which made no logical sense, but that was Daniel. He'd sleep with his left hand tucked under his pillow, always, ever since he was a baby. And when he laughed, really laughed, he'd snort, just once, and then get embarrassed about it. Stop talking. Vincent's hands had curled into fists at his sides. He was mine, I whispered, the tears flowing freely now, unchecked. He was my entire world. And when they told me he was gone, that some drunk driver had stolen him from me, I wanted to die too. I should have died too. The silence that followed was suffocating. Vincent stared at me like I was a ghost, or a bomb, or something equally impossible and dangerous. His breathing had gone shallow, his chest rising and falling in sharp, uneven rhythms. Those details, he finally said, his voice hoarse. How do you know those details? Because I'm his mother. The word came out fierce, primal. I know every scar, every habit, every piece of him because I loved him from the moment he took his first breath. So don't you dare stand there and tell me I'm lying about my own child. Vincent moved then, crossing the room in 3 long strides. For a terrifying second, I thought he might actually hurt me. His reputation wasn't built on mercy after all. But instead, he grabbed the photograph from my hands with surprising gentleness and stared at it like it held the secrets of the universe. The scar, he murmured. Matteo had the same scar. Same place. It's not a coincidence, I said quietly. No. He looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw past the Mafia Boss exterior to the broken father underneath. No, it's not. We stood there, 2 people orbiting the same impossible truth, neither of us willing to let go but neither of us understanding what we were holding on to. I had a funeral, Vincent said abruptly. 8 years ago. Closed casket. My mother arranged everything. She said. He swallowed hard. She said the body was too damaged. From what they'd done to him. My stomach dropped. I had a funeral too. Closed casket. The hospital said the same thing, too damaged. They wouldn't let me see him. Vincent's eyes met mine, and in that moment, we both realized we were standing on the edge of something vast and terrible. A conspiracy that had stolen the same child twice, buried him in 2 different graves, and made 2 different parents believe he was gone. Someone is lying, Vincent said, his voice taking on that dangerous edge again. Someone orchestrated this. But why? Why would anyone? I don't know. He set the photograph back on his desk with careful, deliberate precision. But I'm going to find out. He turned to face me fully, and I saw the transformation happen in real time. The grieving father retreated, and the mafia boss emerged, cold, calculating, lethal. What's your full name? Maya Rivers. Maya Rivers, he repeated, like he was committing it to memory. Or maybe checking it against some mental database of enemies and threats. How long have you worked here? 6 months. And in those 6 months, you never thought to mention that you recognized a photograph in my home? I only saw it today, I said defensively. I've never been in your study before. You're never gone during cleaning hours. Vincent studied me for a long moment, those green eyes dissecting me piece by piece. I forced myself to hold his gaze, to not look away, even though every instinct screamed at me to run. Finally, he spoke. Tomorrow morning. 8 o'clock. You're going to come back to this study, and you're going to tell me everything. Every detail about your son, where you lived, where he went to school, what hospital declared him dead, who handled the funeral. Everything. It wasn't a request. And if I refuse? The question was stupid, reckless, but I asked it anyway. Something almost like respect flickered across Vincent's face. You won't. Because if there's even a chance that boy is still alive somewhere, you'll move heaven and hell to find him. He paused. Same as me. He was right. God help me, he was right. 8 o'clock, I whispered. Vincent nodded once, dismissing me with the gesture. But as I turned to leave, his voice stopped me at the doorway. Maya. I looked back. If you're lying to me, if this is some elaborate con, you won't live long enough to regret it. The threat hung in the air like smoke. I should have been terrified. Maybe I was. But beneath the fear was something stronger, something that had been dead inside me for 3 years. Hope. I'm not lying, I said quietly. I wish I was. I walked out of that study on shaking legs, leaving Vincent Marino alone with his photograph and his questions. Behind me, I heard the sound of glass shattering, the decanter probably, or maybe something else. The sound of a man coming undone. I understood the feeling. I didn't sleep that night. Sleep felt like a luxury reserved for people whose worlds made sense, whose dead children stayed properly dead instead of haunting photograph frames in mafia mansions. I sat at the tiny kitchen table in my studio apartment, watching the hours bleed into each other while the city hummed outside my window. 3 a.m. became 4. 4 became 5. The darkness slowly surrendered to a gray, reluctant dawn that matched my mood perfectly. 8 o'clock was coming whether I was ready or not. By 7:30, I'd changed clothes 3 times, made coffee I couldn't drink, and rehearsed what I'd say so many times the words lost all meaning. How do you explain the worst night of your life to a stranger? How do you make someone understand the specific flavor of grief that comes from burying your child? Vincent Marino's study felt different in the morning light. Less like a cathedral, more like a courtroom. He sat behind his desk, perfectly composed in a charcoal suit, looking like he'd actually slept. The only sign of last night's chaos was the missing decanter, replaced by a coffee service that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Sit, he said, gesturing to the leather chair across from him. I sat. My hands twisted together in my lap, a nervous habit Daniel used to tease me about. Vincent poured 2 cups of coffee with steady hands. Start from the beginning. The night he died. The words were a key turning in a lock I'd welded shut 3 years ago. Everything came flooding back. The smells, the sounds, the way my heart had simply stopped beating for what felt like hours. It was April 7th, I began, my voice barely above a whisper. A Tuesday. Daniel had been at soccer practice. He was supposed to walk home with his friend Marcus, but Marcus's mom called to say Marcus was sick, so Daniel was walking alone. Vincent's expression remained neutral, but I saw his jaw tighten slightly. I was making dinner. Spaghetti, his favorite, even though he'd insist on picking out all the tomatoes. A ghost of a smile crossed my lips, bitter and brief. The phone rang at 6:47. I remember because I looked at the clock, annoyed at the interruption. It was the hospital. The kitchen in my memory dissolved, replaced by sterile white hallways and the smell of antiseptic strong enough to burn my nostrils. They said there'd been an accident. A hit and run. They found his backpack nearby, his school ID. But the body. My throat closed up, and I had to force the next words out. They said the body was badly damaged. Multiple trauma. They didn't recommend viewing. Did you insist? Vincent asked quietly. Of course I insisted. The words came out sharper than intended. I screamed at them. I threatened to sue, to call the police, to do whatever it took. But they just kept saying the same thing, that I didn't want to remember him that way. That it would haunt me forever. I could still see Dr. Patterson's face, sympathetic but firm. Placing a hand on my shoulder like that would somehow make the nightmare bearable. Finally, they brought out Dr. Chun, the head of trauma. He sat me down and explained, in excruciating detail, what a high-speed impact does to a child's body. How the injuries were incompatible with life. How even if I insisted on viewing, I wouldn't be able to recognize him. My hands were shaking now, coffee forgotten. He said the kindest thing I could do, for myself and for Daniel's memory, was to trust them. To let them prepare him for burial without subjecting myself to that. Vincent's knuckles had gone white around his coffee cup. So you never saw him? No. The word felt like swallowing glass. They gave me his backpack. His shoes. One of them was missing a lace because he'd broken it that morning and we'd been meaning to replace it. His jacket with the grass stain on the elbow from when he'd slid into home plate the week before. The flashback hit me like a physical blow. I was back in that hospital room, the fluorescent lights too bright, the walls too white, holding Daniel's jacket to my face and breathing in the scent of him, grass and boy sweat and the cheap body spray he'd started wearing because the older kids did. My screams had echoed off those sterile walls. Primal, animal sounds that I didn't recognize as coming from my own throat. Nurses had tried to calm me, but how do you calm a mother whose heart has been ripped out of her chest? The funeral was 3 days later, I continued, forcing myself back to the present. Closed casket, like they'd insisted. I remember standing there, staring at that wooden box, trying to reconcile the fact that my son, my living, breathing, laughing son, was supposedly inside it. It felt wrong. Everything felt wrong. Did you? Vincent's voice was rough. Did you ever think about exhuming the body? I laughed, a hollow sound. Every single day for the first year. But they said it would be too traumatic, that time and decomposition would have made identification impossible anyway. And part of me. I swallowed hard. Part of me was terrified of what I'd find. Or wouldn't find. Vincent was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee like it held answers. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old wounds. Mateo was 7 when they took him. I looked up, meeting his eyes. This was his turn to bleed. There was a war brewing with the Moretti family. They'd been encroaching on our territory, making moves, trying to destabilize our operations. I knew they'd retaliate eventually, but I never thought. His hand clenched into a fist on the desk. I never thought they'd go after my son. The pain in his voice was familiar. I'd heard it in my own for 3 years. He was playing in the garden. Behind these very walls, supposedly safe. We had guards, cameras, every security measure imaginable. But somehow they got to him anyway. Vincent's jaw tightened. My mother found his jacket by the garden wall. There was blood on it. Not much, but enough. I felt my chest constrict with empathy I didn't want to feel for this man. They sent a message 3 days later. Said they'd killed him. Sent proof, his favorite toy, a dinosaur he carried everywhere, covered in. He stopped, composing himself. My mother arranged the funeral. She said she'd seen the body, identified it, and that I shouldn't have to bear that burden. That a father shouldn't have to see his child like that. Closed casket, I whispered. Closed casket, he confirmed. I wanted to see him. Needed to. But my mother insisted it would destroy me, that the injuries were too severe. And I was. He paused, something vulnerable flickering across his face. I was too broken to fight her. The parallel was impossible to ignore. 2 funerals, both closed casket, both with authorities insisting the bodies were too damaged to view. 2 parents kept away from their children's corpses by well-meaning gatekeepers. 2 children who might never have been in those coffins at all. Someone staged this, I said, the realization crystallizing into certainty. Both times. Someone wanted us to believe our children were dead. Vincent's eyes met mine, and I saw the same cold fury I felt burning in my own chest. The question is who, he said quietly. And more importantly, why? He stood abruptly, moving to the window overlooking the garden where his son had disappeared. The morning light cast shadows across his face, making him look older, wearier. There's only one way to know for certain, Vincent said, his voice taking on that dangerous edge I'd heard yesterday. My heart began to race. What are you suggesting? He turned to face me, and the look in his eyes was both terrifying and exactly what I needed to see. We dig up the graves. The room spun slightly. The thought of disturbing Daniel's final resting place, of confronting whatever truth lay 6 feet under, made my stomach turn. But beneath the nausea was something else. That same wild, impossible hope from yesterday. When? I asked. Vincent smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Tonight. I'll make the arrangements. And if the coffin isn't empty? The question I was terrified to ask. Then we'll know the truth, and we can finally grieve properly. He paused. But if it is empty? He didn't need to finish. If the coffin was empty, everything changed. Every tear I'd cried, every night I'd wished to die alongside my son, every moment of the last 3 years had been built on a lie. And someone was going to pay for that. The arrangements, as it turned out, involved more than just shovels and darkness. Vincent dismissed me after our conversation, promising to handle the logistics. I should have gone home, should have tried to eat something, or at least pretend to function like a normal human being. Instead, I found myself wandering the mansion's hallways in a daze, my mind replaying our conversation on an endless loop. I was so lost in thought that I didn't notice the 2 men until they were blocking my path. Miss Rivers. The one on the left was built like a brick wall, with a scar running down his jaw. Mr. Marino would like us to ask you a few questions. Something cold slithered down my spine. He just finished asking me questions. Different questions, the other one said. He was smaller but somehow more frightening, with eyes like chips of ice. Come with us. It wasn't a request. They led me to a room I'd never seen before, windowless, soundproofed, with a metal table and chairs that looked like they'd seen their share of unpleasant conversations. My heart hammered against my ribs as they gestured for me to sit. How long have you been planning this? Brick Wall asked, circling me like a shark. Planning what? The con. Ice Eyes leaned forward, his breath smelling of cigarettes and menace. You show up 6 months ago, work your way into the household, gain trust, and then suddenly you're claiming the boss's dead son is yours? That's quite a story. It's not a story, it's the truth. Convenient truth, Brick Wall interrupted. Real convenient that you just happened to get hired here. That you just happened to wander into his study. That you just happened to see that specific photograph. My hands clenched into fists on the table. I didn't plan any of this. I didn't even know who Vincent Marino was when I took this job. I needed work, that's all. Where'd you work before? Ice Eyes pulled out a notepad, flipping through it with theatrical precision. Says here you've had 17 different jobs in the last 3 years. Cashier, waitress, cleaning lady, factory worker. Never stay anywhere longer than a few months. Why is that? Because I couldn't bear to be around people. Because every workplace eventually had someone who'd ask about my life, my family, whether I had kids. Because the pity in their eyes when I'd say I had a son, but he died was worse than the loneliness. I moved around, I said instead. So what? So it looks suspicious, Brick Wall said. Looks like someone who's running from something. Or running towards something. I'm not. Who sent you? Ice Eyes slammed his hand on the table, making me jump. The Morettas? The Castellanos? Who's paying you to mess with the boss's head? Nobody. I'm telling you the truth. The truth. Brick Wall laughed, a sound like gravel in a blender. Lady, the truth is you're either delusional or you're running a con. Either way, you're a liability. The interrogation went on for what felt like hours. The same questions from different angles, designed to trap me in contradictions that didn't exist. They wanted me to be lying, needed me to be lying, because the alternative, that I might actually be telling the truth, was too complicated for their black and white world. When they finally let me go, my hands were shaking and my throat was raw from defending myself. I stumbled out into the hallway, feeling like I'd been wrung out and hung to dry. Rough morning. I looked up to find Vincent's assistant, a polished woman named Sophia who'd always been professionally distant, watching me with something that might have been sympathy. You could say that, I managed. Don't take it personally. They do that to everyone who gets too close to the boss. She glanced around, then lowered her voice. Between you and me? I think you rattled him. Vincent Marino doesn't get rattled. She walked away before I could respond, leaving me alone with that small bitter comfort. I should have left then. Should have gone home, packed my things, and disappeared before Vincent's men decided I was more trouble than I was worth. But I couldn't. Not when we were so close to answers. Instead, I found myself drifting toward the East Wing, where the older staff rooms were located. The mansion had a skeleton crew during the day. Most of Vincent's people worked nights, when the real business happened. But there were always a few veterans hanging around, the ones who'd been with the family for decades. I heard the voices before I saw them. Can't believe he's actually listening to her. Who knows what game she's playing? Could be anyone sent her. I pressed myself against the wall, barely breathing. Did you see his face yesterday though? When he came out of the study. I haven't seen him look like that since. Since the boy died. I know. This voice was older, weathered. Poor Matteo. Such a sweet child. Mrs. Marino took it the hardest. Barely spoke for months after the funeral. My ears perked up at the mention of Vincent's mother. Well, she's the one who handled everything, wasn't she? The identification, the funeral arrangements, keeping Vincent away from. The voice dropped to a whisper. From the body. There was no body, the older voice said firmly. Not really. The Morettas sent back pieces. Mrs. Marino spared him from having to see that. Something cold settled in my chest. Pieces. They'd said pieces. Still strange though, the first voice continued. How quickly she arranged everything. How insistent she was that it be closed casket. Even wouldn't let the extended family pay respects. That's not strange, that's mercy. You don't put a child on display like that. I suppose. A pause. But you remember how she was after? Not just grieving. Almost relieved? Like a weight had been lifted. Watch your tongue, the older voice snapped. Mrs. Marino loved that boy. I'm not saying she didn't. I'm just saying it was odd. The whole thing was odd. Their voices faded as they moved away, leaving me frozen in the hallway with my mind racing. Mrs. Marino had arranged everything. Had insisted on the closed casket. Had kept Vincent from seeing the bodies, pieces that may or may not have actually existed. What if Vincent's mother had orchestrated the whole thing? But why? Why would a grandmother fake her own grandson's death? What possible reason could she have? I thought about Dr. Chun, insisting I not view Daniel's body. The hospital staff, so sympathetic but so firm. The rushed funeral, the sealed coffin. Had someone paid them? Orchestrated my son's disappearance the same way Vincent's mother had orchestrated Mateo's? My phone buzzed in my pocket, making me jump. A text from an unknown number. Cemetery. Greenwood Memorial. Tonight, 11 p.m. Come alone. V. My heart pounded as I typed back, okay. But I couldn't wait until tonight. I needed to see Daniel's grave now in daylight, when the world still made some kind of sense. Greenwood Memorial was a 40-minute bus ride from the mansion. I made the journey in a fog, muscle memory carrying me through the routes I'd walked countless times in the early days, when I'd visit his grave every morning and every evening like some kind of penance. The cemetery was quiet, peaceful. Daffodils were starting to bloom along the pathways. Spring had always been Daniel's favorite season. His grave was in the children's section, marked by a simple headstone, Daniel Rivers. Beloved son. Forever in our hearts. I approached slowly, my feet heavy as concrete. Something felt wrong. The grass around the plot looked disturbed, darker than the surrounding area. Fresh, somehow. And then I saw it. The earth near the headstone was uneven, recently moved. Small divots in the soil, like someone had been testing the ground. One of the funeral flowers I'd left last month, fake roses that I'd thought would last forever, was lying 10 feet away, trampled into the dirt. Someone had been here. Someone had disturbed my son's grave. I dropped to my knees, pressing my hands into the soil, feeling for, what? Evidence? Proof? The earth felt loose, recently turned. Not professionally, not like grave maintenance. More like someone had been digging. Searching. Looking for something that isn't there, I whispered to the wind. My phone buzzed again. Vincent, my people are watching you. Stay calm. Don't draw attention. We dig tonight. But someone had already beaten us to it. The question was, had they found what they were looking for? Or had they discovered, just like we were about to, that there was nothing to find at all? The rain started at 10:30, like the universe had a flair for dramatic timing. I stood at the cemetery gates, watching the drops create halos around the streetlights, my jacket already soaked through. Vincent had said 11. It was now 10:58, and every second felt like an eternity stretched on a rack. A black SUV pulled up, silent as a hearse. The back door opened. Get in, Vincent's voice cut through the sound of rain. I climbed inside, water dripping from my hair onto leather seats that probably cost more than my car used to. Vincent sat in the back with 2 of his men up front, not brick wall and ice eyes from this morning, thank God. These ones looked like they specialized in the quiet kind of violence, the kind that left no witnesses. You came alone, Vincent observed. You told me to. Most people don't follow orders from men like me very well. There was something almost like respect in his tone. Especially when those orders involve grave robbery. This isn't grave robbery. My voice came out harder than I intended. This is finding the truth. Vincent studied me in the dim light, rain streaking down the windows between us like tears. You understand what we're about to do? What it means if you're wrong? I'm not wrong. But my hands were shaking, betraying me. And if the coffin isn't empty? If your son really is? He trailed off, but the implication hung heavy in the air. If Daniel really was in that box, decomposed and gone, then I'd been torturing myself with false hope. Then this whole thing was just a grieving mother's delusion, and I disturbed my child's eternal rest for nothing. Then at least I'll know, I whispered. At least I can stop wondering. The SUV pulled through the cemetery gates. Apparently Vincent had the kind of influence that made locked gates open at midnight. We drove in darkness, headlights off, navigating by memory and moonlight filtered through storm clouds. When we reached the children's section, Vincent's men were already there. 4 of them, dressed in black, with professional-grade equipment that made my earlier fantasy of just 2 people with shovels seem laughably naive. Mr. Marino, one of them nodded. Ground soft from the rain. Should make the work easier. Easier. As if there was an easy way to dig up your child's grave. I stepped out into the rain, and it immediately intensified, like the sky was crying for what we were about to do. My feet sank into mud as I approached the headstone. Daniel Rivers. Beloved son. Forever in our hearts. Not forever, I thought. Not if he's still out there somewhere. Miss Rivers. Vincent appeared beside me, rain plastering his hair to his forehead, making him look less like a mafia boss and more like a man about to face his worst fear. Last chance to walk away. I'm not walking away. I turned to face him fully. Are you? Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, maybe, or recognition. The acknowledgement that we were the same, he and I. 2 parents who'd been broken by loss and rebuilt ourselves on foundations of grief so deep they become part of our skeletons. No, he said quietly. I'm not. His men began to dig. The sound of shovels hitting earth was obscenely loud in the silence of the cemetery. Each scrape of metal against soil felt like it was carving pieces out of my chest. I wanted to look away but couldn't. Vincent stood beside me, equally transfixed, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. The rain came down harder, turning the grave site into a muddy soup. Vincent's men worked with grim efficiency, their movements mechanical. They'd probably done this before for less noble reasons. How deep? One of them called out. Standard depth, Vincent replied, his voice steady despite the way his jaw was clenched tight enough to crack teeth. 6 feet. 6 feet of earth between me and the truth. 6 feet that felt like 6 miles. Time became elastic. Minutes stretched into hours or compressed into seconds. I couldn't tell anymore. All I knew was the rain, the mud, the rhythmic sound of digging, and Vincent's presence beside me like an anchor in a storm. Then, a different sound. Wood on metal. We've hit something, one of the men announced. My knees nearly gave out. Vincent's hand shot out, gripping my elbow to steady me. For a moment, we just stood there, holding on to each other like drowning people clutching driftwood. Clear it off, Vincent ordered. They brushed away the remaining dirt with gloved hands, revealing the top of a small coffin. White, with brass handles. I remembered picking it out in a haze of grief, the funeral director guiding me through choices no parent should ever have to make. Boss. One of the men looked up, waiting for the final order. Vincent looked at me. Together. I nodded, not trusting my voice. We descended into the grave, mud sucking at our feet, rain soaking us to the bone. Up close, the coffin looked smaller than I remembered. Had it always been this tiny? Had my son really been meant to fit inside something so impossibly small? Vincent's men had crowbars ready. I watched as they positioned them under the lid, waiting for Vincent's signal. On 3, he said, his voice rough. 1, 2. I closed my eyes, unable to watch. The sound of wood splintering was like bones breaking. 3. I forced my eyes open. The coffin lid came free with a groan of protesting metal and wood. Vincent's men stepped back, their faces carefully neutral, professional masks hiding whatever they actually felt. Vincent and I moved forward as one, looking down into the open coffin. Empty. Completely, utterly empty. No body. No bones. No remains. Just white satin lining, slightly yellowed with time, and absolutely nothing else. The world tilted sideways. A sound escaped my throat, half sob, half laugh, completely unhinged. My legs gave out and I collapsed to my knees in the mud at the edge of the grave, staring down at that empty box like it was a miracle and a nightmare wrapped in the same impossible package. "He's not here," I whispered. "He's not here." Vincent had gone very still beside me, staring into the coffin like he could make a body appear through sheer force of will. His breathing had gone ragged, his hands trembling as he gripped the edge of the grave. "Matteo," he breathed. Then louder, anguished, "Daniel. Whatever his name is, he was never here." One of his men spoke up carefully. "Boss, we should leave us," Vincent snapped. "All of you. Now." They retreated without question, melting into the rainy darkness like ghosts. It was just us now, two people standing over an empty grave, holding the shattered pieces of 3 years of grief. I don't know who broke first. Maybe it was me, maybe it was Vincent, maybe we both shattered simultaneously. But suddenly I was sobbing great, heaving sobs that shook my entire body. Not tears of sadness this time, but something wilder, more primal. Relief. Rage. Hope. Vincent sank down beside me, and for the first time since I'd met him, the mask completely fell away. His face crumpled, tears mixing with rain, and he looked like what he really was beneath all the power and violence, a father who'd lost his son and just found out he might still be alive. "They lied to us," I said through my tears, my voice gaining strength. "They lied to both of us. They made us believe our children were dead, made us grieve, made us bury empty coffins." "Who?" Vincent's voice was raw, dangerous. "Who would do this?" But even as he asked, I saw the realization dawning in his eyes. The same realization that had been growing in my mind since I'd overheard those whispers in the mansion. "Your mother," I said quietly. "She arranged Matteo's funeral. She kept you from seeing the body. She insisted on the closed casket." Vincent's face went white, then red, fury replacing grief in the span of a heartbeat. "If she did this, if she took my son and made me think he was dead." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I pushed myself to my feet, rain streaming down my face, mud coating my clothes. I looked down at that empty coffin, the lie I'd been living with for 3 years, and felt something shift inside me. The grief that had weighed me down like chains suddenly transformed into something else. Fire. Pure, burning determination. "He's alive," I said, my voice steady now, strong. "Daniel is alive. Somewhere out there, my son is breathing and living and," my voice cracked, but I didn't let it break. "And I'm going to find him." Vincent stood beside me, and when I looked at him, I saw the same fire reflected in his eyes. "Not just you," he said. We're going to find him." He held out his hand. "Partners." I looked at his outstretched hand, the hand of a mafia boss, a dangerous man, someone I should probably run from. But he was also a father who'd lost his son, who'd just discovered that loss might not be permanent. I took his hand. "Partners." We stood there in the rain, hands clasped over an empty grave, making a silent vow. To find our son. To make whoever took him pay. To burn down the world if that's what it took. Behind us, the cemetery stretched out in darkness, filled with graves holding bodies that were actually dead. But not Daniel's. Not anymore. My son was alive. And I would move heaven, hell, and everything in between to bring him home. The Marino family estate sat on the outskirts of the city like a crown jewel, or a fortress, depending on how you looked at it. Vincent's mother, Isabella Marino, lived in the main house, a sprawling Mediterranean-style mansion that made Vincent's place look modest by comparison. We arrived at dawn, still covered in cemetery mud, running on nothing but adrenaline and fury. "She'll be awake," Vincent said as we pulled through the gates. "She never sleeps past 5. Old habits from when my father was alive." I glanced at him. In the growing light, I could see the storm building behind his eyes, the kind of storm that leveled cities and left nothing but ash. "Are you sure you want me here for this?" I asked. "You deserve answers as much as I do." His jaw tightened. "Maybe more." The front door opened before we even knocked. An elderly butler stood there, his expression shifting from professional courtesy to alarm when he saw Vincent's face. "Master Vincent, Where is she?" Vincent's voice could have cut glass. "The solarium, sir. But perhaps you'd like to." Vincent brushed past him. I followed, my heart hammering against my ribs. The solarium was all windows and morning light, filled with exotic plants and the kind of careful beauty that cost a fortune to maintain. Isabella Marino sat at a small table, delicate china teacup in hand, reading the newspaper like this was any other morning. She looked up when we entered, and I saw where Vincent got his eyes from, the same green, though hers had faded with age. She was small, elegant, perfectly composed in a silk robe that probably cost more than my yearly salary. "Vincent, darling." Her voice was smooth, cultured. "What a pleasant surprise. Though you look like you've been," her gaze shifted to me, and something flickered across her face. "Recognition? Fear? Digging graves." Vincent moved forward with predatory grace. "Funny you should mention that." Isabella set down her teacup with careful precision. "I don't appreciate your tone. And I don't appreciate being lied to for 8 years." Vincent's voice was deadly calm. "Where is he, mother?" "I don't know what you're." "Don't." The word cracked like a whip. "Don't you dare pretend. We opened Matteo's grave tonight. Want to guess what we found?" Isabella's face went carefully blank, but her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her teacup again. "Vincent, you shouldn't have." "Nothing." Vincent slammed his hand on the table, making the china rattle. "We found nothing. No body. No bones. No son. Just an empty coffin that you told me contained my murdered child." The silence that followed was suffocating. Isabella looked at Vincent, then at me, calculating. I could almost see her mind working, deciding whether to keep lying or finally tell the truth. "Sit down," she said finally, her voice tired. "Both of you." "I'll stand," Vincent growled. "Vincent, please." For the first time, Isabella's composure cracked, revealing something vulnerable underneath. "If you want the truth, then sit down and let me explain." We sat. I perched on the edge of my chair, every muscle tense, ready to run or fight or both. Isabella took a long breath, her hands folded in her lap like she was praying. The Moretti family was going to kill him. Not might, would. "They'd already made 3 attempts on your life, Vincent, and when those failed, they turned their attention to easier targets." Vincent's face was stone. "So you faked his death?" "I saved his life," Isabella corrected, steel in her voice. "Yes, I staged the kidnapping. Yes, I arranged for the funeral, the closed casket, all of it. Because if the Morettis believed Matteo was dead, they'd stop hunting him." "You let me grieve," Vincent said, his voice breaking. "You let me think my son was murdered. Do you have any idea what that did to me?" "I know exactly what it did." Isabella's eyes glittered with unshed tears. "But a grieving father was better than a dead son. I made the choice I had to make." My voice came out rough, unused. "Where did you take him?" Isabella's gaze shifted to me, really seeing me for the first time. "Who are you?" "Answer her question," Vincent demanded. "I placed him in foster care," Isabella said quietly. "Under a new identity. A new name. I had connections, people who owed me favors, who could create a paper trail that couldn't be traced back to us. He was 7 years old. Young enough to adapt, to forget." "What name?" I asked, though I already knew. God help me, I already knew. Isabella looked directly at me. Daniel Rivers. The room spun. Vincent turned to stare at me, then back at his mother. That's impossible, he said. Daniel was her son. She gave birth to him. No. Isabella's voice was gentle but firm. She didn't. The words hit me like a physical blow. I tried to speak, but nothing came out except a strangled sound. I don't understand, Vincent said. Isabella sighed. Matteo Daniel was placed with a foster family. The Hendersons. They were good people, vetted, safe. The arrangement was meant to be permanent. She paused. But 2 years later, Mrs. Henderson died suddenly. Cancer. Mr. Henderson couldn't cope with raising a child alone. He surrendered Daniel back to the system. My hands were shaking. I gripped the arms of the chair to keep from falling apart. That's when you came in, Isabella said, looking at me with something that might have been pity. Maya Rivers. A woman desperate to adopt, to have a child of her own. The agency matched you with a 9-year-old boy named Daniel. No, I whispered. No, I remember being pregnant. I remember giving birth. You remember wanting it so badly that your mind created the memories, Isabella said softly. It's called false memory syndrome. When the trauma of infertility becomes too much to bear, sometimes the brain protects itself by. Stop. The word came out as a sob. Just stop. But she didn't stop. The truth kept pouring out like blood from a wound. You adopted Daniel when he was 9. You loved him, raised him. And because the adoption records were sealed, because I'd made sure his past was erased, you never knew he'd been someone else first. Isabella's voice cracked. You never knew he was my grandson. Vincent had gone pale. You're saying she raised my son. For 3 years, she was his mother, and neither of us knew. Yes. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Every memory I had of Daniel, of Matteo, was suddenly tilted, shifted, wrong and right at the same time. The way he'd sometimes have nightmares he couldn't explain. How he'd occasionally call me by the wrong name in his sleep. The scar he couldn't remember getting. I loved him, I choked out. I loved him like he was mine. He was yours, Isabella said firmly. Love makes a mother, not biology. You were his mother in every way that mattered. Until someone took him from her, Vincent said, his voice hard. The hit and run 3 years ago. What really happened? Isabella's face went white. I don't know. Bullshit. I don't. She stood abruptly, agitated. I had people watching him, always. Making sure he was safe. But then one day, they reported he was gone. There was an accident, a funeral, and she looked at me with genuine anguish. I thought he'd actually died this time. I thought my plan had failed and he'd died anyway. You never told me, Vincent said quietly, dangerously. What would I have told you? That the son you'd grieved for 8 years had been alive all this time, living with a woman on the other side of the city, and now he was actually dead. Isabella's voice broke. I couldn't put you through that. So you stayed silent, Vincent said. Even when you suspected. I didn't suspect, Isabella interrupted. I believed he was dead. I mourned him all over again. She turned to me. I mourned with you, without you knowing. Every day for 3 years. The pieces were falling into place, but they formed a picture I didn't want to see. Someone knew, I said slowly. Someone knew about the first fake death. About the foster care, the adoption, everything. Vincent's eyes met mine. And they used that knowledge to take him a second time. But why? I asked. If he was already hidden, already safe, why take him again? Leverage, Vincent said grimly. If you want to control a king, you take his heir. Even if everyone thinks the heir is dead. Isabella sank back into her chair, suddenly looking every one of her 68 years. I tried to protect him. I tried so hard. You tried to play God, Vincent said coldly. And now he's gone. Again. He stood, and I stood with him. Partners, just like we'd promised in the graveyard. We're going to find him, Vincent said. It wasn't a statement, it was a vow. And when we do, Mother, we're going to have a very long conversation about the consequences of your protection. Isabella didn't argue. She just sat there, a small woman in a big house, surrounded by beautiful things that couldn't fill the hole where her grandson should have been. As we left, I looked back once. She was crying silently into her teacup, and despite everything, despite the lies and the manipulation and the years of grief, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But my son was still out there somewhere, and sympathy was a luxury I couldn't afford. The Morettas, Vincent said as we walked to the car. They're the only ones who would have known about the original plan. You think they took him? I know they did. His face was set in lines of cold fury. And they're going to wish they hadn't. The Moretti compound wasn't hard to find. Vincent had been tracking their movements for years, the way predators track prey. What was hard was getting close enough without starting a war. We sat in Vincent's study, a war room now, with maps and photographs spread across every surface. His men came and went like shadows, bringing intelligence, whispers, pieces of a puzzle we were desperate to complete. The hit and run was staged, Vincent said, pointing to a grainy surveillance photo. Look at the timestamp. The hospital called you at 6:47. But the accident was reported at 6:32. I leaned closer, my pulse quickening. They called me 15 minutes after the accident was reported? Exactly. Vincent's jaw tightened. Which means they already had Daniel before the accident was even staged. The whole thing was theater, a performance to make you believe he was dead. My hands clenched into fists. The hospital. Dr. Chen. Were they paid off or threatened? Probably both. Vincent pulled out another photo, this one of a man in an expensive suit standing outside a hospital. This is Carlo Moretti, second in command of the Moretti family. He was at the hospital that night. The rage that swept through me was physical, burning hot behind my eyes. They took him. They took my son and made me believe he was dead while they, what? What did they want with him? Leverage. Vincent's voice was cold, clinical. The Morettas knew about my mother's plan. They must have had someone on the inside, someone who knew Matteo had been placed in foster care. They waited, watched, and when the time was right, they took him. But why wait so long? Why let me have him for 3 years? Vincent met my eyes, and I saw the same helpless fury I felt reflected back at me. Because they wanted me to suffer first. They wanted to watch me grieve, watch me break. And when they finally revealed they had my son, he stopped, swallowing hard. It would destroy me completely. Except they never revealed it, I said slowly. They've had him for 3 years and haven't used him as leverage. Why? Because something went wrong. Vincent pulled out a final photograph, and my breath caught in my throat. It was recent, taken maybe days ago. A boy, 13 or 14 now, with blonde hair darker than I remembered and eyes that had seen too much. But I would have known him anywhere. Daniel. Matteo. My son. Where? The word came out as a whisper. We're still trying to pinpoint the location. But Marco, Vincent gestured to one of his men, found something else. Marco stepped forward, holding a clear evidence bag. Inside was a torn piece of paper, yellowed and creased like it had been folded and unfolded 1,000 times. We found this in one of the Moretti safe houses we raided last night, Marco said. Hidden in a vent. Vincent took the bag and handed it to me. Through the plastic, I could see childish handwriting, the letters shaky but determined. Mom, if you find this, I'm alive. They said you think I'm dead, but I'm not. I'm in a big house with guards. They call me Matteo, but I'm Daniel. I'm your Daniel. Please find me. I miss you so much. I remember everything. The spaghetti without tomatoes. The way you sing off key. How you tuck me in twice because you forget the first time. I'm alive, Mom. Please don't forget me. The paper slipped from my hands. The sob that tore from my throat was raw primal, the sound of a mother's heart breaking and healing at the same time. Tears streamed down my face as I picked up the bag again, clutching it to my chest. He remembers, I choked out. He remembers me. 3 years and he still remembers. Vincent's hand was suddenly on my shoulder, steady and grounding. He didn't forget you, Maya. He's been waiting for you. I looked up at him through my tears and saw something I hadn't expected, wetness in his own eyes, quickly blinked away. We're bringing him home, Vincent said, and his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. The Morettas will pay for every day they kept him from us. Every tear, every nightmare, every moment he spent thinking he was forgotten, they'll pay in blood. No. The word came out sharp, cutting through his rage like a blade. Vincent's eyes narrowed. No. I stood, still clutching Daniel's note, my whole body vibrating with purpose. We bring him back alive. That's the priority. Not revenge, not bloodshed, Daniel. If we go in guns blazing, if we turn this into a massacre, he could get caught in the crossfire. These are the people who stole him, who made him believe his mother thought he was dead. I know. My voice cracked. God, Vincent, I know. I want them to suffer just as much as you do. But I want my son more. I want him alive, safe home. Revenge can wait. Vincent stared at me, jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. The war happening behind his eyes was visible, the mafia boss who dealt in violence versus the father who'd just gotten a second chance. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and dangerous. We bring him back alive. But after that, you can burn their entire world to the ground, I finished. And I'll light the match. But Daniel comes first. Vincent held out his hand, and I took it. The handshake was firm, binding, a pact sealed not just in words but in shared understanding. Partners, he said. Partners, I echoed. Marco cleared his throat. Boss, we may have something. One of our informants said the Morettas moved a package 3 days ago. High security, middle of the night. They took it to the old Rossi estate on the north side. Vincent's eyes lit up with cold fire. The estate that's supposedly abandoned? The very one. I clutched Daniel's note tighter, feeling his words through the plastic like a lifeline. I'm alive, Mom. The Rossi estate loomed against the night sky like a sleeping giant, all dark stone and darker windows. From our position in the tree line, I could count 6 guards on patrol, maybe more inside. Vincent's hand signal brought the team to a halt. 2 minutes, he whispered, checking his watch. When the guard rotation shifts, we move. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. I was dressed in tactical gear that Vincent's people had provided, black on black, a bulletproof vest that felt both reassuring and terrifying. They tried to give me a gun, but my hands had shaken so badly that Vincent had quietly taken it away. You don't need to shoot, he'd said. You just need to be there when we find him. That's what matters. Now, crouched in the darkness with armed men surrounding me, I wondered if I was brave or insane. Probably both. Vincent's phone buzzed silently, the signal. The guard rotation was changing, creating a 30-second window of vulnerability. Go, Vincent breathed. We moved like shadows, fast and silent. I'd never been graceful, but fear made me quick. Vincent stayed beside me, one hand on my elbow, guiding me through the darkness. His men spread out, taking positions, neutralizing guards with efficiency that should have horrified me but instead filled me with fierce gratitude. These men were helping me find my son. I'd forgive them almost anything for that. The side entrance was exactly where the blueprints said it would be. Marco picked the lock in seconds, and we slipped inside to a service corridor that smelled of dust and disuse. Basement level, Vincent murmured, consulting his phone where the blueprints glowed softly. If they're keeping him here, that's where he'll be. We descended stairs that creaked under our weight, each sound making my heart stop. At the bottom, a hallway stretched out, lined with doors. Most stood open, revealing empty rooms, abandoned furniture. But one door was different. Newer. With a lock that gleamed in the dim light. Vincent and I locked eyes. He nodded to Marco, who moved forward with his lock picks. The click when it opened was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. The room beyond was small but not cruel. A bed, a desk, books scattered around. And sitting at that desk, head bent over a notebook, was a boy. My boy. He'd grown. Taller, thinner, his face losing the roundness of childhood. His hair was darker blonde now, longer than I'd kept it. But the way he held his pencil, tongue poking out slightly as he concentrated, that was pure Daniel. Matteo, Vincent breathed beside me, his voice breaking on the name. Daniel's head snapped up. His eyes, those blue eyes with gold flecks, went wide. He stared at us like we were ghosts, like his mind was struggling to process what he was seeing. Mom. The word came out as a question, disbelieving, desperate. And then I was moving, crossing the room in 3 strides, dropping to my knees in front of him. My hands reached for his face, cupping his cheeks, feeling the solid reality of him under my palms. Daniel, I sobbed. Oh my God, Daniel, you're real, you're here, you're... Mom. He crashed into me, his arms wrapping around my neck with desperate strength. Mom, Mom, Mom. We collapsed together, holding each other so tight it hurt, both of us crying so hard we couldn't breathe. His face pressed into my shoulder, and I could feel him shaking, could hear the broken sounds he was making. I knew you'd come, he gasped between sobs. I knew you didn't forget me. I knew it. Never, I choked out, running my hands through his hair, over his back, needing to touch every part of him to believe he was real. I could never forget you. Never, never, never. They said you thought I was dead. They said you'd moved on, that you were happy. Lies. I pulled back enough to look at his face, to wipe the tears from his cheeks with shaking hands. All lies, baby. I've been looking for you every single day. Every single day. Behind us, Vincent stood frozen in the doorway. I saw him through my tears, this powerful, dangerous man staring at his son with an expression of such raw longing it made my chest ache. Daniel noticed him too. He swallowed hard. They said you're my real father. That my name is supposed to be Matteo. Vincent moved forward slowly, like approaching a wild animal. I am your father. But Daniel, his voice cracked, Daniel is who you are. Who you've become. And that's okay. Daniel looked between us, confusion and hope warring in his eyes. I don't understand any of this. You don't have to, I said, cupping his face again. Not right now. Right now, we just need to get you home. The words seemed to break something in him. Home, he whispered. I want to go home. Boss. Marco's voice cut through the moment, urgent. We've got movement upstairs. We need to go. Now. Vincent's expression hardened instantly. He pulled off his jacket and wrapped it around Daniel. Stay between Maya and me. No matter what happens, you stay with us. Understand? Daniel nodded, his hand finding mine and gripping it like a lifeline. We moved fast, back down the hallway, up the stairs. I could hear shouting now, the sound of guards responding to the breach. Vincent's men were ahead of us, clearing a path, but I knew we were running out of time. Go, go. Vincent urged, his hand on Daniel's back, pushing him forward. We burst out of the side entrance into chaos. Lights were on now, guards swarming. Someone shouted, and then gunfire. The sound was deafening. Vincent shoved us both down behind a stone wall, his body covering Daniel's, my arms wrapped around both of them. Bullets pinged off stone, the sound like the world ending. "Vincent!" I screamed. "I've got him!" Vincent shouted back. "Marco, suppressing fire. Get them to the tree line." Marco appeared, grabbing my arm, pulling me up. "Move, Mrs. Rivers. Now." I kept hold of Daniel's hand, refusing to let go as we ran. Behind us, I could hear Vincent shouting orders, the continued pop 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 of weapons. But I didn't look back. Couldn't look back. All that mattered was Daniel's hand in mine and the tree line getting closer. We crashed into the forest, branches whipping at our faces. Behind us, the gunfire was getting more distant, but my heart wouldn't slow down. Daniel was gasping beside me, struggling to keep up. "Almost there," Marco panted. "The cars are just." An SUV burst through the trees ahead of us, Vincent at the wheel. He threw open the door, and we piled in, Marco shoving us into the back seat before climbing in front. "Vincent," I started. "I'm here," he said, his voice tight. Blood was seeping through his shirt at the shoulder, but his hands were steady on the wheel. "Everyone in? Good. Hold on." The SUV roared to life, tearing through the forest. I could see headlights behind us, hear the sound of pursuit. But Vincent drove like a man possessed, taking corners that made the vehicle tilt dangerously. Beside me, Daniel was shaking. I pulled him close, pressing his face against my chest the way I used to when he was small and frightened. "It's okay," I murmured, even though I wasn't sure it was. "You're safe now. I've got you." His arms wrapped around me, holding tight. "Don't let go," he whispered. "Please don't let go." "Never," I promised. "Never again." Vincent's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror. Blood was dripping down his arm now, staining the seat, but he just smiled, fierce and triumphant. "We got him," he said. "We got our boy." And despite the bullets and the blood and the chaos, I smiled back. Because he was right. We'd gotten our boy. 3 weeks later, I stood in the doorway of Daniel's room, his new room in the fortified wing of Vincent's mansion, watching him sleep. He'd grown 2 inches already, or maybe he'd always been this tall and I just hadn't been able to see it before. His hair was trimmed now, neat and blonde again, the way he liked it. But there were shadows under his eyes that spoke of nightmares, of 3 years that couldn't be erased with comfort and safety. He had another one last night. I turned to find Vincent beside me, his arm still in a sling from the bullet wound that had required surgery. The doctors had said he'd been lucky, 2 inches to the right and it would have hit an artery. "I know," I said quietly. "I heard him crying. I came to check on him, but you were already there." Vincent's expression softened. He called for both of us. "Mom first, then Dad." The words still came out uncertain, like he wasn't sure he'd earned it yet. "You have," I said, reading his thoughts. "Earned it, I mean. You saved his life." "We saved his life." Vincent looked at me with something that might have been wonder. "You know, my mother called again this morning." Isabella had been trying to reach out since the rescue, desperate to see her grandson, to explain, to be forgiven. Vincent had been ignoring her calls. "And?" I prompted. "And I told her she could visit. Supervised. Briefly." He sighed. "Daniel has a right to know his grandmother, even if she made catastrophic choices. But it'll be on our terms." Our terms. The phrase should have sounded strange, but it didn't. We'd become a unit, Vincent and I, 2 people who'd started as maid and employer and become something else entirely. Partners. Co-parents. Family. The scandal had been immediate and spectacular. The media had gotten hold of the story somehow. Mafia Boss's lost heir returns from dead. and for 2 weeks, we'd been besieged by reporters. Vincent's lawyers had managed to suppress most of it, but enough had leaked to make us notorious. I was no longer just Maya Rivers, the maid who cleaned Vincent Marino's house. Now I was Maya Rivers, the mother who'd done the impossible. The woman who'd dug up graves and infiltrated mafia strongholds and brought her son home. Vincent had made it official last week, in front of his entire organization. "This woman is under my protection," he'd announced, his voice carrying that dangerous edge that made even hardened criminals pay attention. "Not as an employee. As family. Anyone who threatens her, threatens me." The message had been clear. I was untouchable now. It should have felt strange, being protected by a man whose business involved things I didn't want to know about. But when I looked at Daniel, at Matteo, at our son, I found I didn't care. Vincent had helped me find my child. Nothing else mattered. Behind us, Daniel stirred, making a soft sound. Vincent and I both tensed, ready to comfort him if the nightmares came again. But instead, his eyes fluttered open, focusing first on me, then on Vincent. "Mom." His voice was sleep-rough. "Dad." Vincent's breath caught. It was the first time Daniel had called him that while fully awake. "We're here, baby," I said softly, moving into the room. Vincent followed. And I was never letting him go again. Daniel sat up, and I noticed his hands were shaking slightly. "I had the dream again. The one where I wake up and you're both gone. Where I'm back in that room and..." "Hey." I sat on the edge of his bed, and Vincent sat on the other side. We'd become practiced at this, at surrounding him with our presence until the fear receded. "Look at me. Look at us. We're real. You're home. This isn't going away. Promise." His voice cracked, making him sound young again. 12 instead of almost 14. "Promise," Vincent said firmly. "You're a Marino. You're my son. And Marinos protect their own with everything they have." "I'm also a Rivers," Daniel said, looking at me with those blue-gold eyes. "Right? I'm both." The question hit me square in the chest. For weeks, I'd been terrified that learning the truth, that he was Vincent's biological son, that I hadn't given birth to him, would change how he saw me. Would make him love me less. "You're both," I managed, my voice thick. "You're Daniel Rivers and Matteo Marino. You're whoever you want to be." "I want to be your son," he said simply. "Both of you. Is that okay?" Vincent and I looked at each other over Daniel's head, and I saw my own emotions reflected in his eyes. Relief. Love. Gratitude. "More than okay," Vincent said roughly. Daniel suddenly reached out, grabbing both our hands. "I knew you'd find me," he whispered. "Even when they told me you thought I was dead, even when they said I'd been forgotten, I knew. I knew you'd come." The tears came then, for all three of us. Vincent pulled Daniel into a fierce hug, and I wrapped my arms around both of them. We sat there in the pre-dawn darkness, holding each other like the world might try to tear us apart again if we let go. "The Morettas," Daniel said eventually, his voice muffled against Vincent's shoulder. "What happened to them?" Vincent's expression went cold, hard. "They're being handled." I knew what that meant. After Daniel's rescue, Vincent had systematically dismantled the Moretti organization. Some had been arrested, evidence mysteriously appearing that linked them to dozens of crimes. Others had simply disappeared. Vincent hadn't shared details, and I hadn't asked. Some things were better left unknown. "Good," Daniel said fiercely. Then softer, "They told me Mom had forgotten me. That she'd gotten a new family." "Never," I whispered, cupping his face. "I visited your grave every week. I talked to you like you could hear me. I never stopped being your mother, not for a single second." "The grave with no body," Daniel said, and there was something almost like dark humor in his voice. "That's so weird." "Everything about this is weird," Vincent said dryly. "But we're together. That's what matters. Later, after Daniel had fallen back asleep, this time peacefully, wedged between us like he used to do when he was small and afraid of thunderstorms, Vincent and I stood in the hallway. "Thank you," I said quietly. Vincent looked surprised. "For what?" "For believing me. For helping me find him. I gestured vaguely, for all of this." "You're his mother," Vincent said simply. "Biology doesn't change that. The way you love him, the way you fought for him," he stopped, his voice going rough. "That's what makes you his mother. Not genetics." I felt something crack open in my chest, some last piece of fear I'd been holding on to. "And you're his father. Not because of DNA, but because you saved him. Because you're here, every night, checking on his nightmares." We stood there in comfortable silence, two broken people who'd found wholeness in the most unlikely way. "I should go," I said eventually. "Try to get some sleep before sunrise." "Maya." Vincent's hand caught my arm. "You know you don't have to stay in the guest wing anymore. This is your home too." I looked back at Daniel's door, at the room where our son slept safely for the first time in 3 years. "I know," I said softly. "Thank you." As I walked to my room, my home, I thought about empty coffins and fake funerals and 3 years of grief. I thought about finding a photograph that shouldn't exist and digging up a grave that held nothing but lies. But mostly, I thought about Daniel's arms around me, his voice whispering, "I knew you'd find me, Mom." I'd buried an empty coffin 3 years ago. Had mourned and grieved and died a little myself. But now, standing in this house that had become a home, with my son sleeping safely down the hall and a partner I trusted with my life watching over him. Now, I made a new vow. I would never bury my son again. Not in truth. Not in lies. Not ever. He was home. We were home. And nothing in this world would tear us apart again.